The load-bearing vine snapped with a wet tearing sound that echoed through the docking bay, and Melissa watched with mild interest as an entire section of the biological support structure sagged approximately 15 degrees to the left. She wiped her hands on her jumpsuit, leaving green smears across the already impressive collection of stains, and nodded with satisfaction. "There," she said to nobody in particular. "That should do it." The docking bay door, which had been stuck halfway open for the past 20 minutes, suddenly lurched into motion with a grinding sound that suggested several important components had given up on life. It slammed shut with enough force to crack the translucent amber resin that served as the door's frame, then immediately bounced back open and hung at a jaunty angle that was probably not part of the original design specifications. Melissa picked up her toolbox and stepped back to admire her work. The door was open. Mission accomplished. The fact that it would probably never close again seemed like a problem for someone else to worry about, and Melissa had never been the worrying type. Behind her, something that looked like a walking tide pool had a complete nervous breakdown. Commander Korath of the Tideborn Imperial Fleet stood frozen in the docking bay entrance, his two large obsidian eyes fixed on the human female who had just casually ripped out a support structure rated to hold 40,000 pounds. The soft blue bioluminescent patterns pulsing beneath his translucent skin had cycled through yellow-green and were now rapidly approaching a concerning shade of orange. His skin became more translucent as stress hormones flooded his system. The gill slits along his jawline fluttered despite the perfectly oxygenated atmosphere. Moisture began beading off his body in visible droplets where his semi-translucent tissue met his limbs, and he became aware that he was releasing pheromones that roughly translated to predator. Detected flee immediately. This was not the intelligence briefing he had received about humans. According to Tideborn military intelligence, humans were a weak species from a moderate category planet who had recently developed basic faster-than-light capability. They were supposed to be fragile, short-lived, and technologically inferior. The plan had been simple: accept their cultural exchange, gather intelligence on their defenses, and then invade within the next lunar cycle. Korath was beginning to suspect the plan had some flaws. Melissa had moved on from destroying their docking bay and was now crouching next to their shuttle. She examined the landing gear with quick efficiency, poking at components that were absolutely not designed to be poked. "This strut's about to fail," Melissa called out. "You've got stress fractures along the entire support column. Honestly surprised this thing is still standing." She grabbed the strut with one hand and pulled. The landing gear came off, just came off. Ripped free from its moorings with a sound like a tree being uprooted. The entire shuttle lurched to one side, its weight redistributing onto the remaining 3 landing struts with a groan of protesting metal and biological composites. Melissa held up the strut, examining it critically. "Yeah, see? Total structural failure. You're lucky this didn't collapse during landing. Could have killed somebody." She tossed the strut aside. It hit the bay floor with a crash that echoed like a death knell. "She's going to kill us," the guard next to Korath whispered, his gill slits fluttering wildly. "The human is going to kill us all." "Possibly," Korath agreed. His bioluminescence had progressed to full orange-red, and the patterns were pulsing faster. "But if we run, she might chase us." They stood in silence, watching Melissa pat the shuttle before picking up her toolbox and walking toward them. She moved with the casual gait of someone who had never once considered that she might be in danger, which Korath was beginning to realize might be because nothing in the universe was actually capable of threatening her. "Hey," Melissa said when she reached them, apparently unaware that both Tideborn had gone rigid with terror. "I'm Melissa, structural engineering specialist. You guys got any more stuff that needs fixing?" Korath stared at her. She was nearly 2 feet shorter than him, built solid and compact like a chunk of dense coral, with strange, flexible skin that looked like it would tear if exposed to anything sharper than a strong breeze. There was a stain on her uniform that might have been old lubricant or possibly lunch. She looked completely harmless. She had just ripped through bio-steel with her bare hands. "Welcome," Korath managed, his subsonic vibrations pitched slightly higher than normal, creating rippling sounds in the air. "To the Tideborn Imperial vessel Eternal Tide. I am Commander Korath." "Cool ship," Melissa said, looking around. "Interesting use of organic materials. Must be a pain to maintain, though. Living systems are always trying to grow in directions they're not supposed to." As if summoned, the other human appeared from the shuttle's access ramp. Henry was tall where Melissa was short, thin where she was solid, and he moved with the nervous energy of someone who was acutely aware that everything was going wrong but lacked the specific knowledge to identify what or how. "Melissa!" Henry called out, his voice pitched with enthusiasm that suggested he was very close to a breakdown. "There you are. Did you fix the door?" "Yep." Melissa gestured at the listing, cracked, permanently open doorway. "All set." Henry looked at the door. His smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes died. "That's great. Very fixed." He turned to Korath, and his smile somehow got wider. "Commander Korath, thank you so much for agreeing to this cultural exchange. Earth is so excited to learn about Tideborn technology. This is truly historic." Henry was sweating. Korath could see it beating on his forehead, could smell it. A sharp, acrid scent that his aquatic-based biology registered as vaguely toxic. Humans apparently leaked fluids when stressed. This seemed like a terrible evolutionary adaptation, but then again, humans could tear through military-grade materials, so perhaps they could afford a few design flaws. "The honor is ours," Korath said, following the diplomatic script. "We hope this exchange will lead to mutual understanding." What he meant was, "We hope to learn your weaknesses before we invade." What he was beginning to suspect was, "We hope you don't accidentally destroy our ship." Both humans knew Earth was facing annexation. Henry knew this cultural exchange was humanity's desperate last attempt at diplomacy. Korath knew that Earth's small defense fleet wouldn't last a week against Tideborn forces. None of them knew that the invasion timeline was about to change dramatically. "Fantastic!" Henry consulted a tablet, leaving small sweat marks on the screen. "So we'll start with a tour of your vessel, then move on to technology demonstrations, and conclude with dinner." "That sounds acceptable," Korath said. His bioluminescent patterns were slowly fading from red back to orange, which was still several shades more alarmed than he would have preferred. Melissa had wandered off and was now examining a section of the bay wall. She pressed her hand against it, and the bioluminescent organisms growing there flickered and went dark under her touch. "This structural lattice is fascinating. What's the load distribution coefficient?" "I am not the ship's engineer," Korath said carefully. "No problem. I can probably figure it out." Melissa pulled a scanner from her toolbox and aimed it at the wall. Her eyebrows went up. "Huh, that's lower than I expected. Are you guys having any problems with wall integrity in the older sections?" "There have been some minor issues," Korath admitted. "Yeah, you're probably looking at a cascade failure in the next few cycles if you don't reinforce these support nodes." Melissa tapped the wall with her knuckles. The impact sounded like someone hammering on coral. Living materials are great for self-repair, but they suck at maintaining structural integrity under sustained load. I will pass that information along to maintenance. Want me to take a look? I've got some time before the tour starts. No, Korath said, perhaps too forcefully. The last thing he needed was this human tearing apart his ship's walls in an attempt to fix them. That is not necessary. Your call. Melissa shrugged. Just saying, cascade failures are a real pain. Lost a whole apartment complex in Chicago that way. Well, technically it was condemned afterward, but it was still standing when I left. Mostly. Henry's smile had frozen into a rictus of diplomatic terror. Melissa works very hard, very dedicated, sometimes too dedicated. Ha ha. I haven't caused a major structural collapse in almost 8 months, Melissa said, apparently meaning this as reassurance. I'm basically on a winning streak. Korath's bioluminescence went back to red. What neither human understood, what Korath was only beginning to comprehend, was that Melissa wasn't unusual by human standards. She was average. Earth had billions of these creatures, all of them strong enough to tear through materials that Tideborn military engineers had spent decades perfecting. All of them durable enough to survive in conditions that would kill most species. All of them utterly convinced they were weak and fragile and needed to be careful. The intelligence reports hadn't been wrong about human technology. They'd been catastrophically wrong about human biology. And now one of them was loose on his ship, cheerfully identifying structural flaws and offering to fix things. Perhaps, Korath said, making a decision that would save his entire species. We should proceed directly to the technology demonstration. I believe you were interested in seeing our military capabilities. This wasn't part of the plan. But Korath needed to know what else humans could do. And if this human was going to destroy something, better it happen in a reinforced testing facility. Oh, that would be wonderful, Henry said, seizing the change in schedule. We're very interested in Tideborn defensive systems, for purely peaceful purposes. Of course, Korath agreed, not believing him for a second. Melissa just shrugged and picked up her toolbox. Sure. You guys got any big equipment? I love seeing heavy machinery. Korath's skin became visibly more translucent as he released another wave of panic pheromones. They had heavy machinery. They were about to let a human examine it. This was going to be a disaster. The war machine testing facility occupied a heavily reinforced section of the ship specifically designed to contain explosions, weapons discharge, and catastrophic failures. The walls were grown from layered bioceramic plating rated to withstand direct hits from plasma weapons. The floor was covered in impact-absorbing gel, and the ceiling arched high overhead, studded with sensor clusters. In the center of the facility stood the pride of the Tideborn military, the Siege-class combat mech. It towered 40 feet tall on 2 massive legs, its frame a masterwork of bioengineered armor plating and integrated weapons systems. 2 arms, each as thick as tree trunks, ended in weapons hardpoints currently mounting plasma cannons. The entire structure was covered in interlocking ceramic plates designed to regenerate from damage, and the cockpit, buried deep in the chest cavity, was protected by 3 feet of solid biosteel. The Tideborn Empire had used Siege-class mechs to conquer 14 species across 6 sectors. They were, without exaggeration, the most powerful infantry platform in known space. Melissa looked at it and said, "That thing's a death trap." Korath's dimmed bioluminescence actually brightened slightly out of sheer offense. "I beg your pardon?" "A death trap," Melissa repeated, walking toward the mech with her toolbox. Look at those leg joints. You've got all the articulation points exposed, no redundant support, and what looks like a single hydraulic system running the whole range of motion. One penetrating hit, and the whole leg goes dead. The armor is designed to prevent penetration, Korath said, his subsonic vibrations defensive. Sure, but nothing's perfect. You always plan for failure points. Melissa had reached the mech and was circling it now, her eyes tracking over the massive machine with the critical assessment of someone who had spent their career watching things fall apart. And these arms, you've got them cantilevered out with minimal bracing. What's the weight rating? Classified, Korath said reflexively. Doesn't matter. I can see the stress points from here. You fire anything heavy from those hard points, and you're going to get torsional stress through the entire shoulder assembly. How often do you have to replace the mounting brackets? There was a pause. Korath's skin became more translucent. That information is also classified. So, pretty often then. Melissa nodded. Yeah, thought so. Fundamental design flaw in the load distribution. All your mass is top-heavy, and you're running everything through these support columns that are basically asking to fail under lateral stress. She reached out and rapped her knuckles against the mech's leg armor. The sound echoed through the facility like a death knell. You know what? I could probably fix this. The bioluminescence beneath Korath's skin dimmed to almost nothing, and the smell of panic pheromones became strong enough that it was probably detectable from orbit. Henry, who had been trying to fade into the background, suddenly spoke up with forced enthusiasm. What an excellent opportunity for cultural exchange. Melissa is one of Earth's foremost structural engineers. I'm sure her insights would be valuable. Korath turned both obsidian eyes on Henry. Henry stared back, still smiling, apparently unaware that he'd just suggested letting a human examine their most advanced military technology. Or perhaps he was very aware. Perhaps this was exactly what Earth's diplomats had hoped for when they sent a structural engineer on a cultural exchange mission. Let her poke around, identify weaknesses, report back to Earth's military about the vulnerabilities in Tideborn combat systems. It didn't matter. Melissa was already pulling tools from her toolbox. Let me just get a few measurements, she said cheerfully. I'll have a full assessment for you in like 20 minutes. She walked up to the mech's leg and jabbed a device that looked like a cross between a wrench and a scanner into the seam between two armor plates. There was a hissing sound, a crack, and the entire armor plate fell off. It hit the gel floor with a wet thud that seemed very loud in the suddenly silent facility. Melissa looked at the plate, then at the exposed interior of the mech's leg, then back at the plate. Huh, she said thoughtfully. Those fasteners are weaker than I thought. That's definitely not up to military spec. What's the failure rate on these things in actual combat? Korath made a sound like water draining through a clogged pipe, low, gurgling, and full of existential despair. Don't worry, Melissa said. I can fix it. She reached into the exposed machinery with both hands and pulled. Something went crunch. Melissa, Henry said, his voice pitched higher than normal. Maybe we should let the commander's technicians. Nah, I've got it. Melissa's voice was slightly muffled because she had leaned farther into the mech's internal systems. There was a snapping sound, a brief shower of sparks that she ignored completely, and then she emerged holding a component that was definitely important and definitely should not have been removed. See? This coupling joint was already cracked. You're lucky this didn't fail in the field. Somebody could have died. She said it casually, like she was pointing out a loose thread not catastrophic equipment failure that could have killed a pilot mid-combat. She tossed the coupling joint aside and reached back into the mech. Korath watched in paralyzed horror as Melissa proceeded to disassemble the Siege-class combat mech's leg with her bare hands, and what appeared to be a moderately sized wrench. Components that required specialized tools and trained technicians to remove came free under her grip, like they were held together with hope and good intentions. Armor plates designed to withstand plasma fire cracked when she grabbed them wrong. Support struts rated for 40,000 pounds of force bent when she used them as leverage. "This is fascinating," Melissa said, her upper body now completely inside the mech's knee joint. "Your bioengineering is really sophisticated, but whoever did the mechanical integration clearly didn't understand metallurgy. These alloy compositions are all wrong for the stress loads. You're basically guaranteed metal fatigue within, 200 operational hours?" There was a loud crack, and the mech's lower leg fell off. It hit the floor hard enough to make the entire testing facility shake. The severed leg lay there at an unnatural angle, various fluids leaking from the joint, hydraulic lines dangling like severed arteries. Melissa emerged from the wreckage holding what might have been a hydraulic pump, examining it with the expression of a coroner performing an autopsy. "Yeah, this is toast. You really need to replace your maintenance protocols. This kind of wear shouldn't happen in a properly maintained system." Henry had stopped smiling. He stood frozen, staring at the disassembled mech with an expression that suggested he was watching his diplomatic career end in real time. Or possibly watching Earth's last chance at peaceful relations collapse along with the Tideborn war machine. Korath had progressed beyond panic into a kind of calm acceptance. His bioluminescence had dimmed to barely visible flickers beneath his translucent skin. Moisture poured off his body in streams. His skin had become so transparent that his internal organs were clearly visible. The pheromones he was releasing probably translated to, "The end times are upon us." But he'd cycled through so many stress hormones that he was running dry. "Melissa," Henry tried carefully, "perhaps we should—" "Hold on, I want to check the torso assembly." Melissa had already moved to the mech's main body, scanning the armor plating. "If the legs are this bad, I bet the structural support in the core is—" "Yep, there it is. You've got microfractures through the entire spinal column. How has this thing not collapsed, under its own weight?" "Redundant internal bracing," Korath heard himself say distantly. "3 separate support systems." "Yeah, and I can see stress fractures in all 3. Melissa looked back at him with genuine concern. "Seriously, you need to stop using this thing before somebody gets killed. I mean, I'm sure you've already had fatalities from equipment failure, right? These design flaws are pretty fundamental." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather, apparently unaware that she had just dismantled 200 years of Tideborn military superiority in approximately 15 minutes. Or perhaps she was aware. Perhaps every word out of her mouth was a carefully calculated message. "This is your best? This is what you plan to invade Earth with? Let me show you how easily we could destroy it." Melissa patted the mech's torso armor almost affectionately, and another plate cracked under her touch. "Look, I know this probably isn't what you wanted to hear during a diplomatic visit, but I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't point out these fundamental design flaws. Safety is important. I've seen a lot of catastrophic structural failures in my career, some of them my fault, honestly. And this has all the warning signs." "Your fault?" Korath asked weakly. "Oh yeah. There was this overpass in Nevada, totally not up to code. I told them it would collapse, but they wanted to save money on reinforcement, and sure enough, Melissa shrugged. Anyway, after the lawsuits got settled, I figured off-world work might be a nice change of pace. Less legal liability when you're working with alien infrastructure. Jurisdictional nightmare, you know? Henry made a small, choking sound. But seriously, Melissa continued, pulling out her scanner again. You want me to do a full structural analysis? I can have a complete report for you by tomorrow. Free of charge. Professional courtesy. That won't be necessary, Korath said. His subsonic vibrations came out as barely a whisper. You sure? Because I'm seeing some really concerning stress patterns in the torso mounting, and if those fail during operation, the whole cockpit assembly could— We're sure, Henry interjected quickly, finally finding his voice. Very sure. In fact, I think we've taken up enough of the commander's time. Perhaps we should proceed to dinner. Dinner? Melissa checked her wrist device. Oh, damn, is it that late? Yeah, I could eat. You guys eat, right? I read the briefing, but I wasn't sure about the whole aquatic metabolism thing. We eat, Korath said numbly. Cool. Melissa walked away from the mech, from the destroyed, dismantled, utterly ruined pride of the Tideborn Empire, and picked up her toolbox like nothing unusual had happened. Behind her, the Siege-class combat mech lay in pieces. Its leg was completely severed. Its armor was cracked and scattered across the floor. Vital components were strewn about like shells washed up on a beach. And the human who had done this was asking about dietary requirements. As they walked toward the dining area, Melissa chattering cheerfully about human food preferences, while Henry desperately tried to steer the conversation toward literally anything else. Korath made several important decisions. First, they were not invading Earth. Not now, not ever, not under any circumstances. Second, he needed to contact the High Council immediately and recommend they reclassify humans as a catastrophic threat species. Third, he needed to order a complete redesign of every military system in the Tideborn arsenal, because apparently everything they'd built for the past 2 centuries had fundamental structural flaws that a random human engineer could identify in minutes. Fourth, and most importantly, he needed to make absolutely certain that Melissa got off his ship without fixing anything else. They reached Korath's private office where a meal had been prepared. The chamber was smaller and more intimate than the bridge, with bioluminescent walls that pulsed with soft light. A table grown from the floor held an arrangement of nutrient blocks and synthesized proteins arranged to look aesthetically pleasing. Melissa looked at the food, looked at Korath, and said, "So I've been meaning to ask, you guys have any structural engineers on staff? Because I noticed some concerning settlement patterns in the port-side hull, and I think you might have a foundation issue. Well, not foundation exactly since you're in space, but you know what I mean. Load-bearing distribution problems." Korath's bioluminescence flickered and nearly went out completely. Henry pulled out his tablet with shaking hands and began typing frantically. The message he sent back to Earth was brief. Mission success. Tideborn will not invade. Repeat, will not invade. Melissa demonstrated human capabilities, perhaps too effectively. Requesting immediate extraction before she fixes anything else. Melissa, oblivious to the minor diplomatic miracle she had just performed, picked up a nutrient block and examined it critically. This structural composition is interesting, she said, apparently analyzing the food's internal makeup. Though I'm noticing some stress fractures in the nutrient block crumbled in her hand. Huh, Melissa said. You might want to adjust the binding agent ratios. That's not supposed to happen. Korath laid his webbed hands flat on the table, his gill slits fluttering in rapid, shallow movements. His skin had become so translucent that every internal organ was clearly visible, pulsing with stress. His bioluminescence had gone dark entirely, and he released one final burst of pheromones that roughly translated to, "I have gazed into the abyss, and it casually identified structural flaws in my lunch." 3 hours later, the human shuttle departed with Melissa waving cheerfully from the viewport, apparently having had a wonderful time. She had left behind a complimentary structural analysis of the eternal tide, highlighting 47 critical failure points and providing helpful suggestions for reinforcement. She had also left her contact information in case they needed consulting services in the future. Korath stood in the docking bay, the still broken, probably never going to close properly docking bay, and watched the shuttle disappear into the darkness of space. Then he accessed the communication system and requested an emergency session with the High Council. "Honored Council," he began, his subsonic vibrations tired and defeated. "I am pleased to report that our intelligence-gathering mission with the humans was successful. I have learned several critical facts about their species that require immediate attention." He paused, gathering his thoughts, trying to find the words to explain what he had witnessed. "First," he continued, "we will not be invading Earth. Second, I recommend we immediately offer them a non-aggression pact, a technology-sharing agreement, and possibly tribute. Third, I am formally requesting that all Tideborn vessels be ordered to avoid human space unless absolutely necessary. Fourth, if we do encounter humans, under no circumstances should we allow them to help us with anything." There was a long pause as the council processed this information. "Commander Korath," one of the council members said, confusion evident in the rippling tones, "are you saying the humans have superior military capability?" "No," Korath said. "I'm saying they have an engineer named Melissa, and she casually dismantled our best combat mech with her bare hands because she thought it was poorly designed, which it turns out it was. Everything we've built is apparently poorly designed." She helpfully pointed this out repeatedly. Another pause. "She also destroyed our docking bay, removed a landing strut from her own shuttle, predicted multiple structural failures throughout our ship, and suggested our lunch was not up to code, whatever that means. And according to the other human, she is average. This is normal for their species. They are all like this." "All of them?" "Billions of them," Korath confirmed. "On a planet they consider moderate difficulty to live on. They think they're weak and fragile. They have no idea what they're capable of." There was a very long pause. "I see," the council member finally said. "We will take this under advisement." "Please do," Korath said. "And please do it quickly." She mentioned she was looking for contract work. "If she decides to visit anyone else, I want to make absolutely certain it's not us." He closed the communication channel and stood alone in the broken docking bay, surrounded by the scattered pieces of Tideborn pride and military superiority. Somewhere out there, Melissa was probably filing a report about interesting alien engineering techniques, completely unaware that she had just saved Earth from invasion and fundamentally altered the balance of power in 6 sectors. Korath's gill slits fluttered with something that might have been laughter or possibly just hysteria. Humans didn't need superior weapons or advanced technology. They had Melissa, and apparently, that was more than enough.